And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on Tuesday, July 29th, 2025. And we start with the sea ice way in the north along the Beaufort Sea coast. The ice continues to melt off. We have quite a bit of open water now along the Chukchi Sea coastline. There looks pretty clear, and the areas east of Kaktovik toward the mouth of the Mackenzie River. Otherwise, still some lingering ice here along and just offshore of the Beaufort Sea coast, especially between Kaktovik and Utqiagvik, and the slow melt-off will continue. It looks like a little milder temperatures coming up that way by the early weekend. And looking at the satellite imagery on this Tuesday mid-afternoon, we still have low pressure in the North Pacific. Broad circulation, a trough wrapping around it, has spread more cloudiness back up along the Panhandle northeastern Gulf Coast with some light rain showers. That moisture will continue retrograding westward tonight into Wednesday. That's going to bump into this west-northwest flow aloft as it comes over the Alaska Range, and it's going to enhance or develop some rain showers, especially on the south slopes of the Alaska Range around Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, Talkeetna Mountains as we go through, especially later this Tuesday night and during the day on Wednesday. So expect more in the way of clouds and some wetter conditions in south central as we head through the day Wednesday. Further north, we still have scattered showers, thunderstorms across northwest Canada and even up toward the Brooks Range. But it appears we're going to have the high pressure rebuild later this week, Thursday through early Saturday, across the central and northern interior, so that'll allow a return of more sunshine and temperatures to warm back up. We still have the high pressure ridge in the southeast corner of the Bering, giving sunshine, temperatures above 70 inland from Bristol Bay, so some fine weather there. But to the west, another low pressure in front's going to be crossing the Aleutians Wednesday into Thursday, bringing more moisture and breezier conditions, southerly winds to 30 knots by the time we get into Thursday afternoon. So late tonight into Wednesday afternoon, we're expecting still low pressure, North Pacific, remnant of that trough rotating westward, still a weak thermal trough near the Alaska Range. So within this area of south central, there will be some rain showers. And then back to the west, there's that warm front Wednesday afternoon and evening crossing the central Aleutians by Thursday. The lead front kind of washes out. There's another push of even slightly warmer air that's going to scoot on along and just south of the Aleutians by the time we get into Friday. But this will be the main low sitting up here over the central Bering. We still have this pesky low that's kind of wobbled back northward from the North Pacific, approaching the lower Gulf. So that could still provide some showers, especially out over the water. But notice the high pressure is redeveloping now from the Seward Peninsula on up toward the entrance there of the Mackenzie River in northwest along the Canadian Arctic coast. So this area is going to see more in the way of sunshine in the wake of these showers that were across the central eastern interior through the early and mid part of the week. Marine forecast on Wednesday, southeast portion of the state, the Panhandle, inner channels, kind of a mixed bag. Southeast winds 15 knots, Ketchikan, Metlakatla, waves 2-3 feet. Only variable winds 5 knots around Stevens Passage, so waves a foot or two. North winds at 10 knots, waves a foot or two within the area of Lynn Canal. Pretty variable winds off of Sitka, just 5 knots. And as we go up the coast, south winds turning southeast and then east, 10 to 15 knots by the time you get up to Cape Suckling with just 3-4 foot waves tops. Now on Thursday, more uniform wind flow across the inner channel. Southeast winds 10 to maybe as high as 15 knots down here toward Dixon Entrance, with waves generally running a couple of feet. Outer coast, Sitka down off of Craig, south winds 10-15 knots, waves a few feet, and then easterly winds off of Cross Sound on up toward Cape Suckling with waves running just a couple few feet. Pretty light variable winds outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance to Kayak Island, including Prince William Sound. Off the Kenai coast, variable winds, 10 knots. Waves pretty mild there too, maybe 4 feet out as you get out toward the Gulf. Winds will be a little picking up southerly, 20 knots through Lower Cook and Middle Cook Inlet with waves maybe as high as 3 to 4, locally 5 feet down there toward the Kennedy Entrance. And then Thursday, generally variable winds across much of the region, only around 10 knots with waves generally 2 feet or less within the Cook Inlet and maybe a few feet there as you get off the Kenai coast. Again, variable winds around Kodiak Island and much of the Alaska Peninsula expected Wednesday at just 10 knots, so waves 2 feet or so. And on Thursday, still much of the same for at least the Pacific side and around Kodiak Island, a continuation of variable winds around 10 knots with waves just a foot or two. But winds becoming more southeasterly as you trail out down along the Alaska Peninsula to Cold Bay and False Pass. Winds southeast picking up 15 to 20 knots. Now the Aleutians Wednesday, the lead low crossing the western Aleutians. You can see that circulation. Winds turning southeast, southerly, eastern, and central Aleutians picking up 15 to 20 knots as we go through Wednesday afternoon and evening. But by Thursday, as low gets further north and we get deeper into a southerly flow, we're going to find south winds to 30 knots, Nikolsky west through Atka, Adak, and west of Adak before turning around back to the west, Kiska to Shemya at 25 knots. For the area around Bristol Bay, northeast winds 10 knots, rather light waves, only a foot. Northwest winds maybe 10, 15 knots, 1 foot waves within Kuskokwim Bay. Along the lower Yukon coast, west winds 10 knots, waves a foot or two. And for Norton Sound, look for northeast winds of 10 knots with waves running a foot or two. And on Thursday, east winds 10 to 15 knots out of Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay with waves maybe a foot or two. 25 knot southeast to east winds, St. Matthew up to St. Paul. And then northeast winds 10 knots out of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon coast with waves running maybe a couple of feet. And through the Bering Strait, winds will be northeast off the west side of off of Seward Peninsula there, Wales and Port Clarence with waves a foot or two, and easterly just 5 knots. Could have waves locally a little higher out toward Gamble, maybe 3-4 feet, but that would be at tops. Kind of a mixed bag of winds coming up through the lower Chukchi Sea, 10 to 15 knots before flipping around to the west and picking up. Westerly winds will increase 15 to as high as 20 to 25 knots along the Beaufort Sea coast, especially Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik with waves in open water there, 4 to 5 feet. And then on Thursday, winds turn back around to the east-southeast as that high pressure builds warmer air coming in along the coast. And we expect east-southeast winds around 10 knots, Kaktovik through Utqiagvik with waves maybe a couple of feet. Extending down along the Chukchi Sea coast, winds off of the Lisburn Peninsula, Cape Lisburn and Point Hope might be south-southeast about 20 knots. And then coming out of Kotzebue Sound, a easterly 10-knot wind, and passing through the Bering Strait, winds turn back to the south along the west side of the Seward Peninsula, Wales, Port Clarence to just west there of Nome, and on to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. For Thursday, winds will generally be south-southeast at only 10 knots with waves maybe a foot or two.